name is Ryan Miller, and for the past 15 years, I've helped hundreds of people to raise millions of dollars for their funds and for their startups. If you're serious about raising money, launching your business, or taking your life to the next level, this show will give you the answers so that you too can enjoy your pursuit of making billions. Let's get into it. In this week's episode, I bring on my dear friend Jason Hartman. Jason Hartman is an economist, author, and keynote speaker, as well as the founder and CEO of JasonHartman.com and Empowered Investor. Join Jason and I as we go deep on the number one thing that makes the rich richer and the poor poorer, but more importantly, how you can use it to put your wealth on autopilot. You don't want to miss it. Plus, Jason teaches us what he calls the double inflation arbitrage and how using it to your advantage will put your wealth into overdrive so that you too will have the economic insights that you need in your pursuit of making billions. Here we go. Hey, welcome to another episode of Making Billions. I'm your host, Ryan Miller, and today I have a special treat. I have Jason Hartman on the show. Jason Hartman is the founder and CEO of Empowered Investor and Real Estate Tools. They specialize in real estate investments, education, and wealth generation. Jason, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ryan, thanks for having me. And I'm looking forward to digging in and talking to your audience about how they can benefit from what I call the double inflation arbitrage.
Oh, man. Now, this is a treat, everybody. So if you haven't heard of Jason Hartman, JasonHartman.com, Jason has been doing a lot of work in this area for a very long time. We're certainly lucky to have a brilliant mind like you on the show. So you're the author of the Hartman Comparison Index. I saw you present at one of the shows that we were at. You were presenting. And I got to tell you, the information that you share and on your mission is so inspiring. As soon as I heard you, I was like, I got to get this guy on the show. He provides an immense amount of value. So I cannot wait to hear what you have to teach us.
Well, I'm happy to share this stuff, Ryan. And, you know, what I've tried to do in the last 18 years of working with 100% investors and helping them buy properties nationwide and build portfolios of mostly single family homes, a little bit of multifamily and apartments, and, occasionally a deal like a mobile home park or something like that, too. But, I've created some really unique principles, things you haven't heard before. Of course, I've read all the books, followed all the gurus throughout my career and life, and just wanted to really share some innovative strategies that they haven't heard before anywhere else. And I know they haven't heard them because they came out of my own head. One that you alluded to is an index I developed called the Hartman Comparison Index, or the HCI. And the HCI basically helps people understand the value of real estate compared to a whole bunch of things rather than just one thing that people use as the comparison. And that is, of course, the dollar. I believe investors can have a lot of blind spots and make a lot of mistakes by only comparing the value of anything to only one other thing. And that it's so funny. That's what we do. We compare stocks to dollars. We compare real estate to dollars. We compare Bitcoin to dollars. We compare gold to dollars, right? What if we compared it to a whole basket of things similar to the way the Consumer Price Index tries to evaluate inflation, and it's highly manipulated, and I don't believe in the Consumer Price Index, just for the record.
You're in good company.
But conceptually, the idea is good, right? Yeah. And that's what the index does. And then I developed another strategy about 18 years ago, and it's sort of a mouthful. I call it inflation-induced debt destruction. And inflation-induced debt destruction is the hidden wealth creator that investors benefit from, especially with income property. But they can also do it with other asset classes as well. Certainly, it's done within companies, within businesses. Your listeners are certainly familiar with the LBO strategy, or the leveraged buyout strategy.
Correct.
Similar to that in many ways. And I'm happy to dig into these concepts and just go down the rabbit hole with your audience.
Yeah, I love that. So we've got the HCI and inflation-induced debt destruction. I mean, You and I could just keep talking for show after show after show just to pull out all that wonderful information that you're so generous and willing to share with the rest of the world. So I love it. Now, you mentioned something about the double inflation arbitrage. Can you kind of talk about a little bit about what that is and how that might benefit someone listening to a show called Making Billions? Sure. Walk us through a little bit of what that is.
Yeah, well, we'll go into some visual aids, and I'll present some things that'll make it more clear. But essentially, most people get hurt by inflation. Yeah. Inflation is a wealth transfer from the poor and the middle class to the upper middle class, and certainly the elites and the ultra rich, right? That's what it is. It's a wealth transfer mechanism. Mm-hmm. Most people think taxation is the wealth transfer mechanism, and most of the time the rich will complain about it, and they'll talk about wealth redistribution to the poor. Right. Yes. But the reality is that's not exactly true many times. And just so people know where I'm coming from politically, I'm pretty much a libertarian. I believe that I believe in the saying that the bigger the government, the smaller the citizen. Right. And, you can only have sort of two forces in the world. You either have government that has all the money or citizens that have all the money and resources. Right. You can't have both at the same time. We obviously need government to manage some basic things. And like I always say, most people like the government they can see. Yes. Most people who are sane, at least, they like having, streets and highways and police and fire and things like that. The problem comes with all the government we can't see. Okay. That's where all the corruption and inefficiency is. Sure. So, the question is, how do we take the exact strategies that the two most powerful entities the world has ever known are using? So, after God, a supernatural power, right? We have the two most powerful forces, governments and central banks. Yes. Okay. Right. And they are using the strategies we're going to discuss today. So what I say is, there's the old saying, if you can't beat them, join them. And I'm not endorsing their strategies. I philosophically don't like what they're doing, but why not benefit from them? Why not align our interest with the two most powerful forces the human race has ever known, governments and central banks, and let's use the same business plan they're using to benefit and create wealth for ourselves as a defensive strategy and as an offensive strategy as well.
I love that. So given the defense and offense that we can align with, as well as governments, to your point, kind of a funny story or situation. I have nephews who are in their early 20s, and they're always like, "Uncle, how do I make money? I hear your podcast." And I said, "Really? I mean, there's many ways, but if you really want to think about it properly," and I think this is what you're saying, Jason, is to say, learn the inflation game, right? Align yourself with these two powers. Learn the inflation game, because this by itself can almost put you on autopilot to ensure that you don't get left behind. In other words, when they ask, poverty and all these things, which poverty really bothers me. I'm anti-poverty. And we say, look, man, if you really want to get going in your early 20s, learn to align yourself with inflation. Inflation allows people who have inflationary assets to continue to move forward with the economy, participate in the economy. Those who are spending money on video games and everything that they're into, that's deflationary. And it can leave you behind, and almost so far behind, because that gap is getting wider. And so the information that you're sharing is kind of exposing what that gap is, the strategies that are out there, and how to align so that you no longer have to worry about poverty, but you can start to move up that socioeconomic ladder. Totally put words in your mouth. But these are one of those things that to people starting out, learning the inflation game and learning it from you, I think is one of the best things to get started in making billions.
Yeah. And really, anybody listening can do this. This is not a strategy. It's definitely a strategy employed by the elite class. But anybody listening, I bet, can take advantage of these strategies. And so let's kind of dive into it. And first thing we have to understand is that we have to understand that the U.S. government, being the largest economy in the world, and really every government around the world, has a big problem. And that is they have this debt. They have basically used the government coffers to buy votes over the years, and it's like Ronald Reagan said years ago. He said to say that the government spends money like a drunken sailor is an insult to drunken sailors. Okay,
how dare you?
Yeah. So knowing that, the government has got themselves into a corner. And the unholy alliance between governments and central banks, of course, our Federal Reserve is a private company,
right?
And they're like this, though. It's this pseudo-governmental agency, basically, right? And they have a choice, right, in how to respond to the corner they've backed themselves into. Mm-hmm. And so let's kind of go over that a little bit. I'm going to share my screen and just show a few visuals. And for those listening on audio only, we'll try and just kind of explain these so you can follow along. But it's no secret that since the founding of the Federal Reserve in the early 1900s, the dollar has lost most of its value. A dollar today is worth about 2 or 3 cents compared to what it was 100 years ago. Okay. Wow. And this is largely because of government spending. They've basically inflated away the value of the currency. And throughout history, there is no example of any fiat currency, and fiat, now people understand the definition of that word. Thanks to Bitcoin, these ideas have spread a bit, regardless of what you think about Bitcoin. And, I'm not like some huge proponent. I think it's okay. I'd love to see it succeed. I'm not sure it will. But a lot of people have become aware of the massive scam that is just impoverishing most of the human race and transferring their wealth to the elites. And so that's a good thing, right? That people have become aware of that. And fiat, that word simply means by authority or by decree. So all currencies on earth are basically fiat currencies. In other words, it has value because the government says it has value. Yes. But unfortunately, you can't outdo the laws of physics, right? If you say you don't believe in gravity and you jump off a building, gravity is going to just prove you wrong every single time, right?
Yeah.
And so that's true. But what does have value is things that everybody needs, commodities. Right? Commodities have intrinsic value, and they're not attached to any one currency. So that's one of the reasons I created the HCI, the Hartman Comparison Index, is because people inherently know that lumber, concrete, steel, copper wire, coffee, food products, wheat, oil, these things have intrinsic value. It doesn't matter what currency you try and denominate it in, or how much you say it cost in dollars or yen or rubles or euros or pesos. The value is the value. It's intrinsic, right? Everybody needs these things and they have certain value, right? So the dollar has been massively debased, and that's why I created the Hartman Comparison Index, to help people understand that. And we're not going to have time to go into the index today, but for more information, just check it out at jasonhartman.com, and you'll get on our email list, and we'll send you info on that.
We'll put the links to that in the description below for those of you who are listening or watching on YouTube. We'll include that contact information for everybody to reach out and get a hold of you and kind of learn a little bit more from you. So.
Yeah, that's great. And then, on my podcast, The Creating Wealth Show, or on YouTube, you can find this information too.
Phenomenal show. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so this inflation-induced debt destruction strategy is the kind of the killer app, if you will. It's the hidden wealth creator in income property, but also it can be done in companies as well, in a business to a lesser extent most of the time, but the strategy still applies. So let's kind of dive into it. Sure. I remember I was talking with someone several months ago about how I'm getting a little worried about my own portfolio because I'm long on everything.
Yeah.
I'm long cryptocurrencies, I'm long gold, I'm long silver, I'm long the stock market, I'm long real estate.
Yeah.
And I kind of realized in that conversation, you know what? But I am massively short on one thing, the dollar. Okay.
Perfect.
And that trade, regardless of what any indexes say, like the dollar index, the DXY, has been a great trade.
Yes.
See, the dollar index compares the dollar to other currencies. But so what? That's not the right comparison.
Yeah.
The right comparison is comparing the dollar to actual goods and commodities that have intrinsic value that everybody in the world needs.
Right.
So shorting the dollar has been a great strategy for me and for tens of millions of people in America and maybe a billion around the world. I obviously don't know the exact number, but some lots of people do this to one extent or another.
Sure.
But those who do it in a big way benefit in a big way. So that's the strategy. Now, look, the people in power spend money like drunken sailors. Whether it be Joe Biden and Janet Yellen, or even the prior administration, which I liked better, but still, they all are big spenders. Okay,
right.
And this puts the government in a big problem. Now, when I say the government, I'm mostly referring to the U.S. government, but this is true of really every government around the world. Okay. Right. So they're in a mess. They've got too much debt, and they've got to figure out how to deal with it. So I've identified 6 ways the government can deal with this. Number one, they can say, look, we've made all these promises, and we're sorry, we can't keep the promises anymore. So whether it be Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, Section 8 housing assistance, disability payments, or your employment as a government employee, or subsidies to farms and agriculture and endowment for the arts and whatever, right? All these promises the government has made, it will simply have the option to say, sorry, we have to default on the promise and institute austerity measures. And Greece had to do this. Many other countries have had to do it to a lesser degree than Greece, whether it be the United Kingdom or Spain or Portugal or whatever. There's just a million examples of it. Right. But this is very politically unpopular. And it tends to get the people to get out their pitchforks and riot in the streets.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work very well. Default is a really bad option. Okay. Right. So the next option is raise taxes, right? We could simply say, look, we're sorry, we've overspent. We got a mess here. We need more revenue to pay for these promises we've made, to pay the national debt, the annual deficit, and to keep promises into the future in terms of unfunded mandates and unfunded entitlements.
Right.
But the problem is that the math simply doesn't work. You can't raise taxes enough to pay for the problem. The problem has become so enormous that there's simply no way to do it. Okay. If you taxed everybody at 150%, it wouldn't be enough to solve the problem.
Oh my goodness. Feels like it sometimes, but yeah.
I mean, look at the government overspends by trillions of dollars every year.
Right.
And the tax revenue is only about $4 trillion a year. Okay.
Yeah.
In an economy that is just over $20 trillion. And unfunded entitlements into the future totaling anywhere between $80 and $220 trillion.
Jeez.
There is simply no way to raise taxes to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And even if that could be done, people will simply stop working. This is what we see in the former Soviet Union or any socialist or communist country. Everybody just suddenly gets lazy when the money's not going to them, when it's going to the government, right?
Sure.
So that's not going to work. We could have a yard sale. The U.S. has lots of assets. It could sell them off, right? Years ago, we heard the news story of selling the ports to Dubai. That didn't happen, but it was pondered. We sell military equipment to high-tech military equipment to countries we probably really shouldn't sell it to, that become our enemies 2 decades later. We've seen that over and over again. The Bureau of Land Management sells off land to developers, right? Toll roads are owned by Chinese companies, American toll roads.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of things we could do in that sense, selling off assets. Okay.
Right.
Another thing we could do is we could use the U.S. military to steal assets from other countries. Right. And certainly the U.S. has been accused of this. It doesn't really do it in a significant way. But if you think about this, it may sound terribly evil, but I mean, just wake up. That's the history of the entire world, right?
Yep.
Napoleon, maybe the most famous military general ever, was nothing more than a thief with an army. Okay. I mean, he would literally say, this country has, all this gold and all this art, let's just go in and steal it, use the military to do it. Right. That's the history of the world. That's the way the map was made. Right.
Wow.
Here's a positive solution. Those are all negative so far.
Not the most popular.
No, not, but realistic nonetheless.
Sure. Yep. You got it.
Technological innovation. Yeah. If there is some big innovation that is maybe America-centric, or maybe it's just a global thing, whether it be biotechnology, energy technology, nanotechnology, whatever it is, right? And your company's investing in some of this stuff, which is great.
Yep.
But if there's some big innovation that makes life better and reduces the cost of living, I mean, that's what technology does, right? Technology makes things cheaper and better.
Right.
And what we have going on in the world is we have this war where, I mean, look at it like a boxing match, for example, right? So you have a fight and the announcer says, in one corner, we have bad monetary and fiscal policy, spend, 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 print, 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 inflate, inflate, inflate.
Yeah.
In one corner, we have that. And in the other corner, we have technology, makes things better, cheaper, and more efficient, right?
Yeah.
And the question is, who will win this fight?
Right.
Will it be bad fiscal and monetary policy that causes inflation and transfers wealth and debases the value of the dollar, the yen, the euro, the peso, any currency on earth, right? Or will technology win? And the answer is we don't know. But technology has its evolutionary limits. Money printing has no limit.
Right.
It can all be, if the government and the central bank wanted to, tomorrow they could just create $100 trillion out of thin air.
Yes.
Okay. But technology has to evolve as people discover one thing, one innovation leads to another, and so forth, right? So we don't know. But I would place my bet on bad fiscal and monetary policy winning overall.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that leads me to the last point.
Yeah.
The most likely strategy, and the strategy that's been used for many, many, many years, is to simply inflate their way out of the debt.
Yeah.
Inflate their way out of the problem. And that strategy is actually a good business plan for governments and central banks. And it's the one they've been using, and it's the same one that we should take advantage of as investors. Okay. So thoughts or questions on those? I've been rambling a bit. So
that's absolutely brilliant, Jason. So in inflating the currency, and I'm sure you'll get into exactly how that phenomenon happens. But walking through inflation and how to get on the right side and how that some people are on the wrong side of that. I would love to hear your opinion, your thoughts on how inflation happens. And then more importantly, how do you get on the right side of that trade or the wrong side of that trade?
Get on the right side of it. Okay, so let's get excited about this bad monetary policy for a minute.
Sure.
And to do that, we've got to understand how inflation really works. And some people might dismiss some of this and say, well, this is kind of obvious. It's really not that obvious. There's a lot of nuance to these things, okay? And that's where the money is made, in the nuance, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But understand that inflation, to understand it, we need to distinguish between real and nominal. Okay.
Right.
Nominal, that word simply means in name only, right?
Yes.
What is the name of something? So if I held up a $100 bill and I said, Ryan, what is this called? You'd say it's a $100 bill. And you'd say that today. And if I held it up 30 years ago and said, what is it called? You'd say the same thing. It's the same name.
Right.
But the value has declined dramatically. right here in my hand are Zimbabwe dollars. Okay. One of my podcast listeners sent these to me years ago. And these Zimbabwe dollars are amazing because this is a $50 trillion note, Zimbabwe dollars. Here's 20 trillion. Here is 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. You know, one Zimbabwe dollar used to actually be worth something. Yeah. And now it's worth nothing at all because they have printed so much of it into existence that the value has just declined. Right. So the difference between real and nominal, the difference between price and value. And we have to understand that inflation is this insidious hidden tax. It's a hidden tax. It's a pickpocket. It's a liar. It's a thief that destroys purchasing power of most people, right? It destroys their purchasing power. It destroys the value of savings, of stocks, of bonds, and even equity in real estate. Yeah. Now, I'm talking today mostly about how real estate is the great inflation wealth creator. Right. And it is. But equity in real estate is not the same as real estate. Okay. Yes. It's different. Okay. But thankfully, it destroys the value of debt. Yes. And debt, as I like to say, is my favorite 4-letter word. Okay. Inflation is the most powerful method of wealth redistribution. It's not taxation. Taxation is far too obvious. Inflation is more subtle, and it is more powerful in terms of a way to redistribute wealth. Inflation redistributes wealth from lenders to borrowers because the borrowers pay the money back to the lenders in cheaper dollars over time. And it also redistributes wealth from old people to young people. Why is that? Mostly old people, hopefully at least, have assets. They have what I have above: savings, stocks, bonds, and equity in real estate. And young people have the other thing, debt. Yes. So without anybody dying and without anybody passing wealth through inheritance, they pass it every day through inflation as that money, that wealth is transferred to younger generations. Right. Okay. So that happens. So in 1972, I like to share a real world example that happened to tens of millions of people in the United States. Okay. So say, for example, someone bought a house in 1972. The house price back then was about $18,000. I mean, depends what number you look at. Is it a new home? Is it a resale home? Sure. Different surveys survey a different amount, but let's call it $18,000. Right. They put 20% down, meaning they got a mortgage for roughly $14,000. Okay. And in 1972, $1 was worth $1. But 12 years later, that dollar was only worth 40 cents by 1984. Now, they borrowed this money at 7.37%, which was the interest rate in 1972. Okay. Yep. And by 2001, when they're getting ready to pay that mortgage off, that dollar, by the way, I got a leaf blower outside. And by the way, Ryan, I'll just say, this is the biggest problem facing humanity. Yeah. It's not inflation. It's not COVID. It's leaf blowers. These things have to go away.
Can a guy just get a break? I mean, come on.
They are a menace to society. Okay. A total menace to society.
Oh, great. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, this is phenomenal. So here we are. We're in 1972 buying a house, 20% down, right? Doing your thing, as many people have, our parents and their parents and
millions
so on.
Of people. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we're doing a lot of this thing, and you're saying, hey, yep, great, get into a house, whatever that might be for you. But the thing that maybe you don't realize is what's going on with the dollar in terms of when you borrowed a lot of dollars and used that to acquire assets versus over time when you're ready to pay that off. There's some things that have changed. You might still be in the same house paying off that same mortgage, but it's not the same.
Right. This dollar reducing in value is a fantastic deal for people when they have mortgages, especially mortgages that are paid by renters, right? This is part of the double inflation arbitrage, right? Because they thought they were borrowing the money at 7.37%, which is what the interest rate said when they got the loan on the loan docs. Right. But after inflation debased the value of the dollars they were paying back, they really were only paying 1.06%. in inflation adjusted dollars. And this is just according to the CPI, which is understated.
Yeah.
In real inflation terms, they were paying much less than this. But wait, there's more. After tax savings, because they get to deduct the interest,
right,
and the IRS doesn't understand inflation very well, so they get to deduct the full interest payment, and their interest rate is literally negative 1.16%. They literally got paid to borrow the money.
Yes.
It's totally incredible. This is the hidden wealth creator. Now, here's an analysis of the deal. Okay. They borrowed just over $14,000. They repaid just over $36,000 with interest.
Right.
But after you adjust for inflation, the real repayment amount was only just over $16,000. Their effective interest rate on the papers said 7.37%. Their real interest rate was 1.06%. And then they got a tax deduction on the interest, making the real repayment only $12,655,
right,
less than they borrowed.
Compared to $36,000, right? So what a difference.
$36,000 they repaid, but they borrowed $14,000.
Okay, so the change between the two, yeah, of course.
Yeah. So they had a negative interest rate in real terms of 1.16%. They got paid to borrow the money.
Right.
This is the hidden wealth creator. And, here's a table showing each year of inflation and exactly how that worked and that analysis at the end. Okay.
Right.
But this is the phenomenal way to benefit from inflation. And look, nothing is for sure except death and taxes. Okay. Right. Those are the only things guaranteed. But I would bet everything that the future long-term is inflationary.
Yes.
Because of those 6 things that I shared, right?
Right.
The governments and the central banks around the world have to inflate. They literally have no other choice. Okay. That is their solution. It is their business plan. And we should align our interests with these 2 most powerful forces the human race has ever known.
Yes.
The best way we can do that is through income property.
Yeah.
The second best way we can do that is through a business where we can raise money and pay it back either in equity or bonds. And really, it's the leveraged buyout strategy. Okay. Right. Now, what is a leveraged buyout? Really, let's analyze that for a moment. It became very popular in the 80s. We all heard of these, Wall Street icons like T. Boone Pickens, Carl Icahn, Ivan Boesky, et cetera, right? They loved LBOs because with an LBO, a leveraged buyout, what they would do is they would find a company to acquire. They would load it up with massive amounts of debt, and they would use that company's cash flow to repay the debt. Boy, that sounds just like buying a rental property to me.
Exactly
right?
What it is. Yeah.
You use 80% of the bank's money. You tell the tenant to pay the mortgage for you, right? You don't pay it yourself. And then you basically cut up the parts. That's what the leveraged buyout people did a lot of times, the corporate raiders. They'd cut up the parts, those assets, and sell them off to also repay the debt. And they'd basically have a free company.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you do with property, right? You refinance the property over time. You get all of your investment back, yet you still own the asset.
Right.
It's a phenomenal deal.
It's a brilliant business model.
It's got really unique multidimensional characteristics. And that's why I absolutely love income property.
Thank you so much. And you mentioned early on, and I just wanted to connect the dots here. So early on, you said, I'm long on this, your whole portfolio. For a minute there, you're having heart palpitations. And then you said, well, wait a minute, there's one thing I'm not long on, and that is the dollar. And so to kind of round out this thought, Jason, if I could jump in, is to say, great, you got these long-term assets like real estate, but we talk about you're short the dollar. And essentially what I'm hearing is, and I wanted to highlight that for our guests, is saying, how do you short the dollar is just meaning you make money on something losing value, which to you is the dollar. So how we do that is you take out debt, but that debt, right, in context of your LBO, you take out that debt and acquire inflationary assets. And then that is how you short the dollar. Don't take out debt and go buy, some handbag or anything. These are use debt to buy assets that appreciate under inflation.
Right.
And that whole phenomenon, even though the asset you bought is long, but
Oddly, though,
process
some of those
is short the
handbags
dollar.
are investments, believe it or
Yeah,
not.
yeah. Fair point. Yeah, bad analogy, but
Right. But look, by and large, you've got to, to make the deal really safe and conservative. I'm a very conservative investor. Okay.
Yeah.
You've got to find a way to delegate the responsibility of the debt to somebody else.
Yes.
So in the LBO example, they delegate it back to the company they acquired. Right. In the property example, you delegate the debt responsibility to the tenant. And you ask them to pay you a little extra every month called positive cash flow.
Yes.
Imagine that. And then I teach another strategy. If you want to hear more about these, just look at my YouTube channel. So far as I'm not deplatformed yet, or my podcast,
haven't kicked you out yet,
or my website.
Yeah.
And, because these are heretical strategies. They don't want you to know. Okay.
Yeah.
You can learn a lot more about these. Just go to my website, jasonhartman.com, and get more. But this other strategy is called refi till you die.
Yeah.
And I give examples of how, millions of people have used this strategy, and our clients use this strategy, and how they really use leverage properly and prudently on these properties.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. I love that. And so focusing on that, so the use of the dollar, we said, you know what, best to know how the dollar works, align yourself with the government, central banks, which is my words, not yours, the shadow government of power, and how they drive the economy forward. And out of those 6 principles, really 2 are the Hail Mary, so to speak. Technology.
Right. They'll institute all of those at the same time.
Yeah. But
it's just the degree to which they institute one or the other. That's the important thing to know.
I absolutely love that. Okay. So is there anything else that you would like to add? We're just starting to wrap up. Yeah. So anything else, Jason, that you would like to add?
No, really, Ryan, just buy properties. It's the most historically proven asset class in the entire world. Buy good income properties that make sense. We teach people how to do that. We provide a referral network where they can buy properties nationwide. We have investors from all over the world. My podcast has listeners in 189 countries. And so we have investors from all over the world, but especially in the US, that are just building these beautiful portfolios of properties. Yes. If you have a good business, that's great, but use the income from that business to create long-term, very stable, sustainable wealth with income property. That's what we recommend. And, I've got tons of free resources, podcast, YouTube, jasonhartman.com.
You're everywhere. Yeah, that's great.
Get on our mailing list and we'll be glad to help you do this. Okay.
I love that. So having someone with such a brilliant mind as yourself, and very generous in providing the knowledge and helping people to move forward in creating wealth. So we'll include all those links so that people can find all of your content. Absolutely fully endorse everything that Jason Hartman has to say. This is definitely a guy that everybody should follow. Well, that's enough for me, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in with me and Jason Hartman on Making Billions. So learn the LBO strategy, invest in income properties, and you too will be well on your way in making billions.
Wow, what a show. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Now, if you haven't done so already, be sure to leave a comment and review on new ideas and guests you want me to bring on for future episodes. Plus, why don't you head over to YouTube and see extra takes while you get to know our guests even better. And make sure to come back for our next episode where we dive even deeper into the people, the process, and the perspectives of both investors and founders. Until then, my friends, stay hungry, focus on your goals, and keep grinding towards your dream of making billions.